Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
When I was in college, freshman year, went to a small liberal arts college in Wisconsin, Beloit College. Shout out to Beloit, go Bucks. But it's a liberal arts college, so you have to pretty much take everything. You can't just say, well, I'm going to be a business major. You've got to do a little of everything. And so early on, my advisor's like, hey, you got to get a science, a lab science in, and looking at them, and it's like, oh, astronomy, that looks really cool. Something different, learn about the constellations and all those sorts of things. I thought kind of a neat thing. It's, what a great thing to take a girl on a walk and say, well, that's the constellation, whatever. Anyhow, that's not astronomy. That's astrology. Not really astrology, but the astronomy class was anything but. It talked about the formation of stars and the chemical composition of stars and how they evolve, and then gravity and how gravity interplays. And I was totally fascinated. I wasn't disappointed at all that I didn't learn about, Orion or whatever constellations were out there. I certainly know some of them, but just trying to understand about how things move in the solar system, in the universe. And, there's an entire belt of rocks and icy debris circling the sun outside the orbit of Jupiter, and Jupiter keeps it in place. But for Jupiter, we'd all be gone because we'd be pummeled with all these rocks. So just the whole notion of influence on the bodies in the sky. And I started realizing that, people have influence. You have gravity. There are things that keep you in situations. There are things that keep people in marriages. There are people that keep people in friendships. We walk into rooms and we exert a gravity on situations. You see a football team hiring a coach, and the influence that they bring, the gravity they bring, brings out the best or might bring out the worst, depending upon the situation. So today, I've got Gary D. Rodriguez on with us, and Gary is he's the CEO of Peopleistic USA, and he's an associate professor of the Business Education Institute. He's a master trainer of humanistic neuro-linguistic psychology, an extended disc trainer, and he's a telex felicitator. Is that correct, Gary?
Teleaxis, my friend.
Teleaxis. And he's known as the people mechanic, and he's a recognized international expert in the science of human excellence and a published author on leadership through Bloomsburg Publishing. We're going to talk about people, influence. Gary,
yes,
welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know what? I should have asked this before. Is it D. Rodriguez? Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. You did it perfectly.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a first. Not really, but I should have asked anyhow. You and I, we got on just before hit record, and we just talked about lots of things, influence. And I was going to start talking about my astronomy class, which is totally fascinating. I spend my time on YouTube watching those videos, and which are, in my mind, are very worthwhile. But to talk to somebody about you and, the actual influence that people walking into the room have, riff away.
Well, I thought it was really a fascinating metaphor to begin with astronomy and talk about the influence of planets on one another, because the planets and the gravitational pull and how planets will orbit around one another is such an incredible metaphor for leadership, because we look at like the larger the planet, the greater the gravity, and how planets form and how they begin to just start coming from like this massive of gas and particles to form this amazing planetary system that harbors lots of life, hopefully, and other planets other than ours, and then be able to have a pull and influence on everything else. But if we look at how a planet actually has that influence, it's by the slow development that begins to start creating greater gravitational pull that then begins to become a very large influence on the entire system. And many people know this, there's an organization called the HeartMath Institute. And they were originally hired by the European Soccer Association to understand how 10 people in a stadium of 10,000 could evoke a riot during that period of time when European soccer matches, they were having these horrible violent riots that would happen in the bleachers all around the stadium. So they wanted to understand how human beings influence one another. So this is a perfect kind of segue, because ultimately at the end of the day, our influence to other people is really based upon our ability to have deep leadership, self-leadership, but also the art of influence leadership, because the stronger the leader becomes within themselves, that means, are they managing their minds? Are they managing their emotional states? Are they consistent and congruent? Peter Drucker said it best. He said, leadership is not about being clever or even smart. It is about consistency and congruency. And of course, being value-driven. So when we start looking at what has to happen in this range of influence, it's like we have to begin to start diving deep inside of ourselves first. And many leaders and many leadership trainings never go here. Like they just don't even brush up against the subject. They may do psychometric assessments, you get some insight. They may do behavioral assessments, you get some insight. They'll talk to you about your values, you get insight, and you align your behavior to them as best as possible. But the one thing that I know is that it takes sometimes years to develop trust in your teams when they finally trust you. And it takes one conversation to break it. And once it's broken, you cannot mend it back, because you've broken the consistency and the congruency. So then what breaks people? It's this misalignment between their head and their heart. And most leaders carry into the organization, first of all, a facade of, I'm the leader, I'm going to mold this company or this team like my vision is, which may or may not be congruent to their own values or even the organizational values. So what begins to happen is leaders will come in with a quest for personal significance rather than a quest for creating the most dynamic team, because a leader is only a leader if someone's following them, the most dynamic, productive team that innovates solutions to historical problems. They train your managers to be as humanistically driven as possible and to begin to evolve their teams rather than have them be a cog in the wheel of a particular strategy that rolls out day after day, hour after hour, which keeps people bound into this place of servitude. So it begins first with a leader. Teams will model the leader like a child models their father and mother. If the leader comes in and is abusive, is disconnected, is in your face, driving their agenda, the managers will start to do something quite similar. In time, they'll begin to do that. So the premise is, in leadership teams, you have to dive deep inside yourself. Find out what are those emotional inhibitors that stop you in your own humanity. What is that? And, if we really peel the onions back and start looking at what deep leadership really is, it is about alignment. It's about alignment to your core values, which most people, they're deeply unconscious, never really do the work to discover what their deepest unconscious values are. Their top 5 always drive behavior. If you align your behavior to those top 5 values, your word, thought, and action to those top 5 values, and use those top 5 values as a reference, like if it's outside of those values, I'm going to do a behavior that's inside those values. Your self-esteem starts to rise. Many people as leaders destroy their self-esteem slowly over time by misaligning their words, thought, and actions to those 5 unconscious values, which they haven't identified yet. So a deeper dive is you got to get alignment. Now, there's some other more subtle things that I think are vitally important. And if I was to ask you, Frank, like, how did you become you? Like, how did you become the guy who looks out of the filters you see through, the beliefs you formed, the emotions as a consequence of your perspective and your beliefs? Like, how did you develop that? What would you say to me?
I can think back to when I was in kindergarten. This may sound funny.
It goes back even further.
Well, I can tell, but this is what I remember. I got a Superman costume for Halloween. Now, kindergarten, or at least where I went, I went to morning kindergarten and then was home. I was home at lunch. And then I would put my Superman outfit on, and then the first through the rest of the graders would come home, and their path would go by our house. And I would go out and I would save the girls from the boys. And so it was this Superman complex, just the notion of trying to help other people. And I can see it carrying forward in life.
Yeah.
I remember a conversation with my dad. He just said, you know what, you need to be very careful. You're going to be taken advantage of because you've got a kind heart. And I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be taken advantage of either. So it's, you've got to be guarded. But that's kind of where it started. And there have been places along the way where I haven't been happy with myself because, let's face it, money gets in the way, right? You see other people, they have things and, oh, geez, I'd love to have that car. I would love to have that. I'd love to have that suit. But to do that, I need to kind of be something that I'm not.
Exactly right. I mean, the bottom line is our perspectives, our beliefs, and our emotional states are really built upon core significant experiences like the Superman costume, core significant experiences. Then we start forming a constellation of beliefs. Before your father had that conversation about, you better be careful, you got to be cautious, people aren't that good, sometimes they're bad, you're going to be taken advantage of, you began to form different types of beliefs around that. And so as your life continued, that natural propensity to help others, of course, is still very well alive in you. But we form these constellations of beliefs over time from the core events that happened to us. I was working with an executive from American Honda, and he was very accomplished. And he would go to Japan and sit in the executive board meetings and crumble. And he came to me and said, my hands sweat. I go into a mild panic. I know my stuff. I don't understand it. What is going on with me? Because these things are unconscious.
Yeah.
And what we discovered was that he grew up with a very critical father. And so when he went into an environment where there was a top, strong authority figure in his presence, he would go small, because he had never resolved the trauma of repeated verbal abuse from his father, belittling him and telling him that he was weak, he was, he was a girl, he was this, he was that. And so he never actually ever worked on that. And he went through his life protecting himself, armoring himself, building intellect around himself. But at the core, emotionally, those events compounding were still there.
Is that related to this? I'm sorry, the imposter syndrome? Is it a distant cousin? Or?
Yes, of course it is. So when we start looking at each other's lives, I have no idea what you experience in your life. You have no idea what I experience in my life.
Right.
We carry that into organizations. We carry that into our teams. We carry that into developing our entrepreneurial ventures. If we have beliefs where we're carrying in a sense of low self-worth, of fear of being seen for that part of ourselves that we won't even look at, that creates this resonant field, like in that particular, the Heart Math Institute, because I never completed that thought. The Heart Math Institute, They discovered in their study with the Soccer Association, there is a resonant field that issues out measurable by science 15 feet from you that actually affects other people. In a 5-foot radius, it affects the neurosynaptic firings in another person's brain. So then you have to look at what the heck is that field? The field is the overall complex, compounded emotional states built by the beliefs, the aligned or misaligned values, and the experiences that that person has had. Then they put on we all walk in, we're all competent, we walk into our jobs and our businesses, but if we're carrying unresolved issues with us, with a cloud of limiting beliefs following behind us, that stuff will surface in the context of our businesses. I think I've been an entrepreneur for the last 40 years, maybe longer, 45 years. And when I finally got, oh my God, I'm in this low drip adrenaline and cortisol dump in my body. And I have this fear that I can't even, there's nothing to necessarily be nervous or anxious about, but yet I've got anxiousness and nervousness. Right. What is that? And I began to realize that there were triggers that happen in an entrepreneurial experience that triggers off all the uncertainty. If you had uncertainty as a child, it'll come to the forefront unless you start to resolve it. So this is what I start meaning by deep leadership. I developed a technique that I just wrote a book on that is a trauma resolution technique. I'm talking about compounded traumas. I'm talking about generational traumas and acute traumas. So if we do not start to resolve some of the history, you cannot put a silk sari over a pig and have it look good for very long. The pig is still there. Right. We try to build out our teams and our levels of success on top of oftentimes a lot of stuff that happened to us that we still carry with us that remains unresolved. If it doesn't show up in our businesses, it shows up in our personal relationship. So we have to begin to look at, if we're going to have success, truly open up our heart, truly have that orbiting influence, that resonant field, we have to start really looking at ourselves with a new lens of not only compassion, but resolution. I really believe this, that people are like a glass of milk, Frank. Whole milk, not homogenized.
Okay.
So, and what is inherent in milk? What's inherent in milk is cream. And when our minds are constantly stirring with things that we are dealing with, having our reptilian brain click on, dump cortisol and adrenaline, which is always the disintegrator of our health, quite frankly, and it produces high anxiety and produces more stress than most people would ever want in their bodies. What happens when people have that over time, it wears out the body. But not only that, it creates this stirring of the mind where we never have peace. So unless some of the history is resolved, what happens is the love we are never can really rise to the surface. The cream in the milk must be still in order to be realized and have it rise to the surface. For every leader, we have to come to peace with ourselves. For every leader, we have to do the internal work, the deep work, to be that sun that millions of planets will orbit around. Because when we shine brighter, when the person we actually are underneath the layers of what we've made up, that's happened to us. When we do that, the art of influence, you walk into a room and people will want to follow you. But when you walk in with a mask, or you walk in with a facade of what you don't want people to see about you because you know about yourself, that is what people feel in your presence. That, Frank, is a resonant field, and you cannot bullshit people. If they can't put language to it, they feel it in your presence. They don't know what it is. They can't put a finger on it, but it does not engender trust.
That's fascinating. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. That's fascinating because I find myself talking to people, that I really care. They'll say things like that, and it's like, I just know they don't.
No, you don't.
I don't say that. That's mean, right? Okay, yeah, whatever. But I'm not going to behave. I know when people care about me, and you don't.
Well, remember what I said to you. before we started recording. I said, the reason I reached out to you, because I wanted to introduce myself to you and have a conversation with you, was because I first came to your networking hub. And I was impressed. There were, people there, and I thought, oh, some look really cool, some are pretty funny. But then I got into an individual meeting room. I think about 6 or 7 of us in that meeting room, and the quality of people, I was like blown out. I go to some networking groups and have belonged to several, and I have literally never met the quality of people that showed up in your networking hub ever. And so I was sitting there listening to people speak and hearing what they did, and I kept thinking, who's this Frank guy? Because for this quality of people and this many people to come to this and show up and be genuinely happy. And not only genuinely happy, when someone said to me, oh, I'm gonna introduce you to people, my email box the next day I had 15 emails of introduction from, a half-hour presence in a team of 6 people I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, who's Frank? Because in order for this type of action to happen, this kind of result to happen, they were all orbiting around you and coming into your event because of who you were and the authenticity and the genuine nature of your heart. So I thought to myself, whether he knows it or not, he has this influence of care. And you do. You have a very kind heart. You had it since you were a child. And that is that resonant field that the Heart Math proved. That Heart Math Institute was brilliant from the perspective, you've met people, I know, Frank, that you feel like, oh my God, I don't know what it is about that person. I just want to hang out with them. And other people you've met, they may not have said a word. You go, I don't even want to have a conversation with them. Yeah. Because your gut, there's 100 million neurons here. This is the most intelligent brain you've got. And then your heart is the next most intelligent brain. And then your head, the least. So people get you from their gut, and they get it from the resonant field of your thoughts that you think, the emotional states that ensue, the actions you perform, and the language that you use. I feel compelled to do something. Can I do it?
Go ahead. It's a podcast. You can always zip it out.
Oh, good. I can do it. No. I'm not going to zip in or out. I want to quote from the Dhammapada from Buddha, because Buddha said this quote, and I think it's a pretty popular quote, and a lot of people know it, but I don't think many people really understand that it is the formula, the absolute formula for how you've done you, created you to be you, with all of your gifts and all of your flaws, with all of your drive and all of your obstacles. If people really understood this quote, they would understand themselves and how to fix it. So Buddha said, the thought manifests as the word. The word manifests as the deed. The deed turns into habit. The habit hardens into character. So watch your words and your thoughts with care, and let it spring for concern for all living things. For as the shadow follows the body, as you think and speak, so you become. So let me break that down. Our thoughts are a collection of everything that our nervous system has experienced and what we made up about each one of those experiences that have formulated our belief system. We look out into the world at our own unique version of our reality, which is not reality. It's the best thing we've been able to make up about it. Not right or wrong, just the best thing. Then we language what we think, how we think, representing the impact of all of our experiences on us. Then we use language choices that reflect how we think. If you want to know who someone is, listen to the word choices they use, and you will know how they think. So the thought manifests as the word. The word and the thought create emotional states. Every behavior is driven by emotions. And so when we have beliefs and we see the world a certain way, what begins to happen is we have an RAS system. And what that does is it eliminates contrary evidence in our perceptions from how we believe reality is. So we end up looking out of a smaller and smaller and smaller window. Instead of looking at the infinite possibilities, our belief systems will have us look out of a narrow window. So our thought manifests as a word, word manifests as a deed, emotionally driven. The deeds repeatedly tighten up our belief systems because we're only seeing really what we believe to be true. The deeds harden into our character until we hardwire our nervous system, because emotions create neurological synaptic connections. And through repetition, we form superhighways of neurology biologically. Our thoughts are electrical charges that follow down the path of least resistance. So the most conditioned neurological pathway we've got is what we've habitually thought and done. And then we tighten our life up until we're in such a habit that our character becomes that. And we've done it. We've done it. No one's done it to us. But when we change our thinking by forming different beliefs, we can't form different beliefs if the evidence we have in our life is surrounded by unresolved negative emotions, because your subconscious mind will keep resurfacing events to get resolution. If you don't have the tools to resolve the emotions, it remains unresolved. So you keep repeating the same thoughts over and over and over again, which enforces the beliefs. And this is how we become imprisoned by our past, and it affects our futures. This is what I mean by deep leadership. So when we look at that and we're able to resolve the negative emotions, shift the limiting beliefs, and I've got trainings and processes to do all of that, and then create new habits of excellence that are in alignment to our values, and then we can begin to have the heart open up wider. Then we can have concern for other people. And that resonant field from the Heart Math Institute begins to become the energy that's emanating off of you. And with that, people feel it in their guts. It's not something you have to pretend to be. It's not a new suit or a new anything. It's not your Ferrari. It's not your shiny objects. It's not your house. It is your heart that creates the orbiting influence that millions of planets will be attracted to. From there, the very last thing Buddha says, watch your word, thought, and action, and let it spring for concern for all living beings. For as the shadow follows the body, as you think and you speak, so you become. Now, each one of us have a legacy. We are a thread in the tapestry of humanity. And if we go under-realized, because we're too afraid to face ourselves, we're too afraid to look in the mirror deeply, and because a lot of times people haven't had the tools to unravel it, but they do now. This is what I wrote my book about. They do. They can have it. It exists. And so when they are able to do that, they leave the legacy their soul came here to leave. I started my whole career in the AIDS community. I've sat at the bedside of more people that have died than I care to even remember. You were diagnosed in those days. You were a full skeleton in 3 months, no questions asked, no escape. And what I learned from the privilege of serving that community was that some people who actualized themselves came to resolution with their broken relationships, their guilt, their shame, their pain, the dreams they never realized. When they came to resolution with it, they danced out of their bodies. And those that did not, they clawed at the sheets of their bed to stay in their bodies because they knew they did not accomplish what their soul came here to do. So what we all have to start looking at is the only moment of power is now. We have the precious opportunity to either grow other universes by our energy and our influence, or we contract and implode and turn into a dark planet. We can do either one. It is our choice. And whatever this thing called God is, doesn't care, doesn't have judgment, you're eternal, doesn't matter. It's your choice on what you want to make out of this life. So my premise and my purpose has always been, how do I wake people up to not the urgency, but the importance of every breath they have? And how are they going to use that? If they use it to light the light of other people, then they're using it well. And then it's celebratory at the end of their life. For me, I'm not there yet. But my biggest desire is to walk into death like I'm walking down the aisle on my wedding day. I'm going to marry the beloved. That is what my vision is. And I think everyone's got their own vision, and that's just my kind of happy vision. But what I just want to say to anyone that's listening is that your life is vitally important. You got something here to do that no one else can do. Wake yourself up, clean the crud out of the past, get resolution, align your values, contribute more, and let it spring for concern and love for all things. And then you've got influence.
Wow, that's a lot. Gary, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? People want to talk more, want to explore more with you. I mean, peopleistic.com or garyscourse.com. You've given me a couple of.
garyscourse.com is my relationship training. It's a really important piece of work I put together during COVID when I was in lockdown.
Sure.
Because I believe that the true temple is in the temple of our relationships. So I believe people, when they treat one another with extreme kindness and not without boundaries, I'm not talking about boundaries, but with care and kindness for someone else, there's a little light that goes off somewhere. I just think that, I think Christ did say this. He said, you will know me by how you treat one another.
Yep.
Well, I'm thinking, it's kind of pretty important that we fire up the cylinders of our relationship intelligence and do it differently and do it better. So that course is that. You can contact me. I'll give you my email address. It's just Gary, Gary,
yep.
at Peopleistic. That's PeopleIstic.com. Peopleistic.com. And my website is the same, peopleistic.com.
Okay.
And you can contact me through all those different channels. And I gotta say, I don't know where all that download came from.
That's great.
I don't think I've ever put it together in quite that sequence before. But I wanna really thank you, Frank, for who you are and what you're doing, and the gift of knowing you, and the gift of being on the podcast.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.